Of course, we can talk about the Major League team all we want. This Orioles team, despite maybe not adding as much as many would like this offseason, has a chance to win the World Series. But that doesn't mean they have disregarded this system, which still has a whole bunch of talent. So it's our yearly Orioles minor league draft coming up on this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast.
You are Locked On Orioles, your daily Baltimore Orioles podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey there, Orioles fans. Today is Thursday, March 13th, 2025, and welcome back into the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm your host, Connor Newcomb, but as you can see, if you're watching here on the Locked On Orioles YouTube channel, I've got many a guest today. It is a yearly tradition at this point. Guys, I tried to go back and look, I think either third or fourth annual Orioles minor league draft here on the Locked On Orioles podcast with, of course, the co-hosts of Orioles on the Verge, Nick Stevens, Bob Phelan, Zach Spedden are with me. Guys, thank you again for rejoining the show for this yearly event we do to really highlight the Orioles system before we get this season started.
Of course, it's always fun whenever we can get together on either person show, either group show. So yeah, a lot of fun. Look forward to it every year.
So we are going to do the draft a little bit differently this year than it's been done in the past. We will not be building out entire teams this season, but you're still going to get a chance to learn about 30 or so minor league players in this Orioles system. And it is a little different now because the last couple of years we've done this, the Orioles have had kind of a no doubt top five system in Major League Baseball. And it's been a system that has been super, super top heavy. We would get 5-6 rounds into that draft, and there were still players most people knew because there were so many players at the AA and AAA level who were in this system and were showing off in top 100 lists everywhere. A lot of those guys have graduated or have been traded to other teams. Today, we learn more about kind of the next wave, and I'm sure we're going to talk about a lot of pitchers as well. So how we're going to do it today, each team will draft 3 hitters, 3 pitchers, and 1 deep sleeper prospect at the end. So each team will have 7 players. Each of the 4 of us will get a team going, and the only big rule is you can't draft anyone who has debuted in the major league. So sorry to Kobe Mayo, and a big sorry to Chase McDermott, who has one major league appearance and unfortunately takes him out of this draft. Had he not made that appearance, he's probably the first pitcher off the board, but here we go. Nick, by the random draw, has gotten the first selection. I think most people out there will guess who Nick is about to pick, but we will let him make his selection anyway.
Yeah, it's not going to be a shock at all. I was actually hoping not to get the first pick, though. I think you do some crazy things in the back end of the first round. But I'm not going to be too upset when I can take Samuel Basallo, number 1 overall here. Top prospect in the Orioles system, showing very well in spring training. Still just 20 years old. Positive reports about the defensive improvements. And I think most importantly, something I think we're all getting excited about is there's a real chance that Basallo becomes an international star for this franchise. Something that we had Steve Molesky on the show recently, and he highlighted that Basallo takes a lot of great pride in that. So welcome to the team, Samuel Basallo, and see you in Baltimore later this season.
Everyone be honest, how many times have you watched the home run that was hit over the bleachers the other day? Because I watched it an absurd amount of times. I watched it happen live, and then I just kept watching the video on Instagram because I felt like it was posted by 10 different baseball accounts as I just scrolled through the feed.
Honestly, both of his home runs from spring training I've watched, I don't even know how many times. I'm like, hey, wife who doesn't care about baseball, look at this. This kid's 20 years old. Look what he did. So, yeah, a lot of times.
Easily 3 or 4 from me.
So I have got the next pick, and good preparation because I, again, pretty much knew that Basallo was going to be off the board at this point. And I'm going to take the player that I am most excited to watch this season in the Orioles system because we kind of know the player he is now. And there are so many questions about what player he can become to get to the big leagues. And that is Enrique Bradfield Jr. He will be my first hitter that I will take off the board. It's elite defense in center field. It's 80. It would be more than 80 run if the scale went above 80. That is how many bases he could steal, is probably more than 80 in a major league season when he gets there. And he's got good plate discipline. He's got good bat to ball skills. We all know the big question is he doesn't hit for any power. And I don't even know if the question is about can he get to a point where he's hitting 15 home runs in a season? I think the question is more, how productive can he be if he's going to hit less than 10 homers in a year? Because I don't know how much further you can push the power production. I think it's going to be more about what the Orioles have said about him, which is hitting more line drives and continuing to get on base and wreak havoc. Like, I don't care if he hits 7 home runs per season when he gets to the big leagues. He's going to impact the game in so many other ways.
Hey, he's got more home runs in spring training this season than Kobe Mayo, big power hitter. So I don't know. Narratives are changing now. Yeah, he's a ton of fun to watch. Even if he is who he is and there's no improvement, he's a guaranteed major leaguer on speed and defense alone. And yeah, he's going to be fun to track all the way through the system.
All right, we've got Zach on the clock next with his first round pick.
So I'm going to go with another center fielder in the farm system, and one whose offensive profile is much, much different from Enrique Bradfield Jr., but there's a lot of similar traits, and that's Vance Honeycutt. With his speed, defense, and arm, Honeycutt has 3 60 to 70 grade tools, and the power is for real. I know the big question mark is the hit tool, and it's something that has followed Honeycutt since his days at UNC. There are still questions about it going into his first full year of pro ball, and the very limited sample size that we saw of him after the draft last year really did nothing to satisfy those questions. But I do think that this system is right for Honeycutt in the respect that they can work with him on his swing decisions, get the most out of his power, and at least tame the strikeouts a little bit. I don't think you're ever going to completely get rid of the strikeout issue for Honeycutt, but I think you can get it to a point where it's manageable. So what I see for Honeycutt this year is that he's going to be one of those hitters that goes to Aberdeen, and the back of the baseball card stats for the first couple months of the season are just going to be kind of pedestrian. But when you look at the underlying data, you look at the more advanced metrics, you see the power coming through. He'll get a promotion to Bowie, and that's kind of where I expect him to take off, is when he gets to that more hitter-friendly environment. Strikeout rate, you're going to have to live with a high total there. But I do think the Orioles can improve the hit tool a little bit.
Yeah, I wanted to ask Nick, because I know you're at least out of the Orioles on the Verge hosts, the biggest college baseball watcher, and we know it was a problem in college, and there's been articles written about there hasn't been many players picked in the first round who had as high a strikeout rate as Honeycutt did in college. Do you look at a number, like, I'm sure he's going to get to AA this year. Do you look at a number in your brain that's just like, if he can have a strikeout rate under X in 2025, it's an improvement? I mean, I know the Orioles won't care about the exact number, but is there a general, like, if it starts with a 2, is he in a good spot, we think, going into this year?
Yeah, I was going to say like below 30%, but it is very, very important this year. But I'm zooming out and I'm looking at many other factors this year. I've said before, like, give him some time. It's okay. We're looking at this depth of the outfield specifically. I know we talk about that a lot. It's okay if it takes him an extra year or so to really get going, but don't look at a hard and fast strikeout right there with Honeycutt. It is a major issue, but see what the team is saying about him and look at the whole picture there with Honeycutt to see if he's making improvements elsewhere. And if he is, then we survive to 2026 and see what happens then.
All right, Bob's got the double here, picks number 4 and 5 in the snake draft.
All right, well, first I have to lament not having the first pick, because we've been just gushing over Samuel Basallo all spring training long. I would make the case that he's a better prospect than Gunnar Henderson, Adley Rutschman, and Jackson Holliday. I think it's a little bit of Orioles prospect fatigue up at number 1, since it was like 3 years in a row that happened. And the fact that Basallo, his growth mindset, his work ethic has him improving at a rapid rate that I don't think we've seen an Orioles prospect do before. But moving on to my selection, I suppose. Year of the pitcher, we just came off of that, and we're right back into another year of the pitcher. That's just the case. I think you've seen even the last 2 spring training games with Levi Wells and Zach Fruit, the kind of upside that these talented arms in the system have. So I'm going to take 2 pitchers back to back here. I'm going to go with Brandon Young with my first pick, who was really impressive at Major League spring training this year. Seemed like his fastball was sitting mid-90s, which was up a tick or 2 from last year in his first season coming off of an injury. And he just has poise on the mound. Maybe it's just his laid-back nature in general, but seems like it helps him out there have a slow heartbeat and hit his spots for the most part. Love what he's got. I think he's going to be like a Dean Kramer type a pitcher, maybe a little bit better. I know his fastball is a little bit better, at least in the long run. So I'll take him first. And then with my second pick, I'm going to go with Keeler Morphe, who I think could be the best pitching prospect in baseball a year from now, depending on how the season goes and how much they want to push him. I just think at 18, 19 years old, hitting triple digits with 2 other plus pitches and a slider and changeup at his age, I think he's got the potential to be like the next Grayson Rodriguez type of pitching talent in the system. So give me those 2 pitchers for my first 2 selections.
Well, Bob's taking arms, so we are going back over to Zach. Will he continue to take some arms or take another bat? Because I will say with McDermott not in there, it's really showing off that there's not like a top number 1 slam dunk arm to take. If you're going for arms in this draft, there's more of a lot of depth, which I'm sure we'll get to.
I'm going to continue the run of pitchers here. I'm going to go with Michael Ferret. Ferret ranks eighth on our list, and I've said before that I do think that this time next year he could be the top-ranked pitching prospect in this system. Draft out of JUCO, Ferret took a big step forward last year by adding fastball velocity. He's now topping out at 97 miles per hour. He's got an interesting pitch mix that has been compared to Kyle Braddis that is highlighted by a kick change. He's only going to turn 21 in April, and even if he does not begin this year in Bowie, I suspect he's going to spend a significant chunk of time there. And right now, all of the arrows point upward for Ferret, so I'm going to go with him in this spot.
The kick change, that seems to be the new pitch in baseball this year, is the kick change. Everybody picking it up. But yeah, I mean, probably the fastest riser, at least nationally, it seems like, on prospect lists for the Orioles. Michael Ferret kind of, I mean, in the draft, coming out of nowhere, a small college guy to just get where he's gotten to is pretty impressive. I think some of the top arms already have gone off the list. Am I buying too much into what I just saw with my own eyes here? Maybe, but I'm going to draft Levi Wells, and there's another pitcher I might want to draft next who we also just saw some of, but holy moly, Levi Wells the other day, up to 100, good breaking stuff. Like, he was able to hold that velocity a little bit, which was really, really impressive as well. I've been all over the Levi's this spring. I've been talking about Levi Stout and his improved stuff a lot when he's been on the mound. But Levi Wells, I mean, wicked slider, big strikeouts in Aberdeen last year, 74 of them in 60 innings. There's talk about why he still posted a 6.71 ERA, and I'm sure there are a lot of factors going into that. But you look at a guy who's got that kind of stuff, and if he can keep, I mean, he's not going to sit 100 as a starter, but if he's going to sit 98, 99 as a starting pitcher this year and make his way to Bowie, I mean, the sky is the limit for the stuff that he has. And I thought it was cool to see, like, he got a little erratic in that outing the other day, and he loaded the bases. Then he got a strikeout to strand the bases loaded, and he was probably the most fired up I've seen any Orioles pitcher so far this spring to get a K with the bases loaded in a spring game. Just imagine what he's going to do when the game actually matters, even in a minor league game. So maybe I'm drinking the Kool-Aid a little early on Levi Wells, but you can't deny the stuff he just showed.
No, I'm with you, man. Yeah, his numbers were not good last year, but just looking at a deeper dive, he had a 3.6 or 0.368 BABIP. So really unlucky there. Home run to fly ball rate was a little on the high side. 2 things that a pitcher can't really control: 6.71 ERA, but a 3.78 xFIP. So yeah, I think we're in for a big breakout season for Levi.
All right, we are back over to Nick, who's got the 2 picks now.
I love the Wells pick there, and I will say, when he came back, he missed 5 weeks due to a shoulder injury early on in the year. When he returned, his final 19-20 innings of the season, he had a 4.5% walk rate. So like he's shown that he can get those under control. We'll see what he does long term. But yeah, I was expecting 1 or 2 more bats to come off here, but you guys are rating the pitchers, and I'm going to scoop up some value here, and I'm going to go. Which one do I want? I'm going to go with my pitcher first. We'll say that Nestor Herman. Let me continue the run on pitchers. I'm going Herman. again, something that is going to be very common with many of the pitchers that we take here in these first couple of rounds are he was a small school guy. He comes from the University of Seattle. He was a 13th or 14th round pick. This is a guy who added velo across the board last season, and the helium and hype surrounding Herman this offseason has been higher than I ever expected it would, but he's a legitimate starting pitching prospect here in this organization. And I think if he builds on his 2024, he's going to be a top 5-6 prospect in this system. Whispers of maybe in the conversation for top 100 overall status. I think Keith Law had the best symbolism I think I've ever written is said when talking about Nesterman's fastball, it's like he's throwing aspirin at hitters. I love this kid, and I'm glad we now know who he is because none of us knew who he was when they took him out of Seattle. So I'm going to take my pitcher there to get one before you guys read the rest. And then I'm going to go with outfielder Dylan Beavers with my next one. I was picking between two there. I think you guys know which two, but yeah, I'm going to go Dylan Beavers here. We know it's been a journey here. The Orioles took him with questions about the hit tool, something they do often. It's been a journey with Beavers, and it's like they fix one thing over here and like two things over here break, and they fix those two things, something else breaks. That's kind of seen what it's been like, but we'll see. He showed the power at the beginning of last year when he was in Bowie, and then it kind of tailed off at the end of the year, but he ended the year in AAA. He's Rule 5 eligible this offseason as well. Outfield stacked, so I think this is going to be a big year for Dylan Beavers, but I'm a believer in his development, and we'll see what he does this year.
Yeah, I was going to take Beavers or Wells. I knew you were most likely going to take whichever one. I did not with the back-to-back picks, but yeah, this will be fun. We'll get him in AAA, and who knows? I mean, Beavers could have a year where the Orioles have some injuries and people are calling for him to be in the big leagues at some point this year. This could be certainly his season for that. We're going to take a quick break here. I am on the clock next here in round 3. And as I promised, I'm going to take another pitcher who certainly wowed us this week in spring training. That is coming up next. But first, this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is brought to you by Monarch Money. Do you ever check your bank account and wonder, where did all my money go? Between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it's easy to lose track, but that is where Monarch Money comes in. Your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app, it's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place, so you stop just managing your money and start building wealth. And instead of juggling multiple apps, it's got all-in-one convenience. You can use Monarch to check your finances, track spending, and even plan long-term goals. So take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONMLB at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONMLB for half off in your first year. We are here doing the Orioles minor league draft in 2025 with the co-hosts of Orioles on the Verge. Nick, Bob, and Zach are with us. We are into round 3 of the draft. I am up, and as I promised, I was going to take another pitcher, and as I promised, I might be reaching a little bit for another pitcher who was maybe, I'm not even going to say maybe, was definitely better than Levi Wells in terms of maybe even stuff, but definitely performance this week in spring training. If you thought Levi Wells looked good the other day, go watch what Zach Fruit did on the hill earlier this week. I mean, all in all, in terms of what level he's at, the hitters he's facing, things like that, that was probably the most impressive single performance I've seen from an Orioles arm so far this spring. He gets 8 whiffs on 18 swings in 3 innings. Again, fastball at 98 that touched 100. A menacing 90-mile-per-hour cutter with a good slider to go with it. 9th round pick out of Troy a couple of years ago for the Orioles. I mean, he was a guy where the stats backed it up in Aberdeen last year. We talked about Levi Wells with an ERA of almost 7. Like, Fruit had a 3.03 ERA in 107 innings with a good strikeout rate in Aberdeen. Another guy who we're going to see in now Double-A Chesapeake this year. I mean, I don't know where you guys kind of fall, Wells versus Fruit right now. I'm kind of putting them together just because they both shine so much in spring training, but Wells was mostly about the fastball and the ability to show some stuff. Fruit, I felt like every offering he threw looked major league ready, and he's a guy who's never even pitched in Double-A.
I definitely see Fruit as the most likely of the two to stick as a starter. For his pitch mix, he has a better feel for his pitches and better secondaries right now than Wells. Wells has a more electric fastball, and I do think that if both end up in the bullpen, that could give Wells a higher ceiling. But for right now, I like Fruit a little bit better because I'm more confident in his chances of sticking in a rotation.
Hey, we got Zach on the board next.
I'm a little surprised this guy's still here, which is why I'm going to take him. Maybe I shouldn't be that surprised, but I'm going to go with Judd Fabian for my next pick. And I know now that I have two center fielders with roughly the same profile offensively on my team, but just get into Fabian a little bit. He will be at AAA this year, and there's a clear mandate for him to cut back on the strikeouts and cut down on the swing and miss. 16% swinging strike rate last year to go with a 32.4% strikeout rate, which were both at or near the top of the organization's leaderboard, not numbers you want to be leading this organization in. But Fabian has a lot of things that he does well. He plays a very good center field. He doesn't have elite speed necessarily, but he's a good base runner with good base stealing instincts, pretty solid arm. He hits for power, and he can pretty much post walk rates of 10% year in and year out. Much like with Honeycutt, the key is going to be getting the strikeouts down to a level that is tolerable because he does enough other things well that you could see him getting to the big leagues. And I've said on our show before, maybe the ceiling right now for Fabian is to have a Jake Marisnick type career where he's never more than a fourth outfielder, but he's a very high floor fourth outfielder who can stick on winning teams because he can play all three outfield spots, gives you a little bit of power, has a good arm, does enough things well that if he plays twice a week and strikes out one or two times every time, it doesn't matter because he's offsetting that with his defense, with his power. So Fabian, I'm surprised that he's still here, which is why I'm grabbing him, but I like this pick.
I think we'll probably never get to a point just because of roster fit and profile where they are both in the same Orioles outfield. But I can only imagine how somebody's uncle would feel if Judd Fabian and Vance Honeycutt were in the same Orioles lineup. And even with power production and defense and speed and everything they bring, both rocking like 34% strikeout rates in the big leagues, would be quite a scene to watch the two of them. But it does kind of feel like you've drafted Vance Honeycutt and Vance Honeycutt light with a couple of picks here. But I would be intrigued to see if like Fabian maybe gets there next year and then Honeycutt just takes his spot maybe in 2027. It's interesting. Obviously Honeycutt with a higher ceiling, a better draft pick, but the similar profiles of those two players as we send it over to Nick for another set of back-to-back picks, or excuse me, over to Bob for a set of back-to-back picks.
Yeah, I think no, they're mine. I think Honeycutt and Fabian could probably generate the power to have Camden Yards lit up at night themselves with their the swings and misses there. But I do like both of them as players. The top two guys on my board are both pitchers. I'm not going to take four pitchers with my first four picks. In fact, I'm going to skip over both of them, and I'm going to go first with Ethan Anderson as my first hitter I'm taking. I like Anderson out of Virginia with the bat, switch hitting, a little bit of pop, good hit tool, good swing decisions, going to get on base. Is he going to play defense? He could stand in the corner outfield, first base, a little bit of catcher, but he's a hitter, like switch hitting catcher. He's Adley Rutschman without the ability to play catcher in any real elite way. So, poor man's Adley with the bat, maybe not as much on the field, but I do like his potential with the bat. I think he's one of the top hitters in the system, and he'll start at Bowie. I think he's going to have a great, or High A Aberdeen. We'll get to Bowie. I think he's going to have a great season. And then I will go back to the pitcher route with my fourth pick. But again, I'm going to skip my top two on the board. I'm going to go with Cameron Weston. I just think this kid is a little bit underrated just because he doesn't have the stuff of the Zach Fruit, Levi Wells. He's not going to hit triple digits with the fastball, but he's coming at you with a different angle. He's got a bunch of different pitches, funky delivery, funky changeup, sinker. He's right there. He could have been in AAA Norfolk to end last season. Could start there this year. Could start it back in Bowie for a little bit, but I think he's going to be this year's Brandon Young in the sense that by the end of the season, he's going to be a guy that's like, maybe he deserves to get a start or two in the major leagues before the season ends. And I think he'll be the minor league pitcher of the year for the Orioles. And yeah, give me Cameron Weston.
Shout out to Big Ten baseball, Cameron Weston for Michigan. Back over to Zach as Bob has already filled up his 3 pitcher spots.
I'm going to fill my second pitcher spot here. I'm going to go with Pat Riley, acquired from the Pirates last year at the deadline in the Billy Cook trade. Riley, in his first full year in minor league ball, originally drafted by the Pirates, put together a really nice season as a starter, despite pitching in 2 hitter-friendly ballparks, starting with Greensboro in Pittsburgh system and then moving over to Bowie once he got to the Orioles. At Vanderbilt, you could see that Riley had the fastball to be successful at the next level. But he kept bumping in and out of Vanderbilt's rotation because he just couldn't find the command. Now, there is still some relief risk here. He's got kind of a funky delivery that he struggles to repeat sometimes, and his secondaries have some room for development. But early on, the returns look good for him as a starter. So I think, much like with Zach Fruit, the Orioles are going to have to find a way to live with mechanics that are a little bit different from Riley and continue to develop the pitch mix around the fastball, because if they can do that, he's got the build to be a starter. He can pump the fastball velocity up multiple times through the order. So there's a lot to work with here, and I feel like Riley is one of those guys that could pitch his way. The ceiling for him after this year, I think possible top 100 back-end consideration.
Also just love to trade like that. I don't know if the Orioles are actually going to make a lot more trades like that because the depth of the pitching in the system has grown so much just over the past year. But you get a guy in Billy Cook who gives himself, you get him a better chance in Pittsburgh. We'll see if the Pirates let Billy Cook this year. But I think that was a good trade for both sides. And the Orioles get somebody who's a little more polished as a pitching prospect coming over, which was definitely interesting. And it's a place in Pittsburgh where you can say what you want about what they've done with that organization, but they have a lot of pitchers who are major league ready right now, young pitchers as well. And, you know, the Orioles didn't have space for Billy Cook and the Pirates didn't kind of have space for Riley. So that trade made some sense. I'm going to go with another high floor hitter. It's a player I'm not particularly excited about. And I feel like some of you feel the same way from listening to your show, but the Orioles clearly see something in Griffo Farrell that allowed them to pick him in the second round and 32nd overall with a PPI pick and give him $2.7 million out of Virginia. Like, he's a good player, don't get me wrong. And would I be shocked if he is Jordan Westburg in 3 years? No, because I think when the Orioles drafted Jordan Westburg, there was a little more hype around Jordan Westburg, but it was a similar-ish profile where it was like big school, middle infielder, just kind of not the flashiest player that you're used to seeing in the SEC or the ACC, but gets it done at that high major level. And maybe he just pops this year. Like maybe Griffo Farrell finds himself eventually, and I'm sure he'll start at Aberdeen, but finds himself eventually in Bowie this year, and he just pops. And you know what? If him and Bradfield are going off, and Bradfield does a lot more things flashier because it's flashier tools, but Griffo Farrell's one of those guys where it's like, oh yeah, like he's just like 40s and 50s across the board and all of his tools. He's going to get to the major leagues if that's the player he is. And so why not? I feel like especially a player like that is a guy who can really rack up stats in the lower and middle of the minor leagues, because at his age, he's probably just more advanced. You know, there's questions about the ceiling, but it's just more advanced at his age than a lot of his peers.
Yeah, I feel like when the pick first happened, I was probably the lowest on him, and now I feel like I'm the highest on him. Not super high, but I do feel like, yeah, what he lacks, it is very Jordan Westburg-esque in that what he lacks in, you know, elite defense and elite speed and everything, it's fundamentally sound. It's fundamentally just, I don't want to say perfect, but it's very fundamental style baseball that, you know, you're talking about your uncle being upset watching Vance Honeycutt and Judd Fabian in a lineup. They're going to like watching Griffo Farrell play baseball. I think he reaches AAA by the end of the year, to be honest. Gets that little cup of coffee there. But I've got 2 picks now, and I kind of like how this board is shaking out. So I'm going to go ahead, I think, and finish my pitching staff with 2 pitchers here. And first one I'm going to go is Luis De Leon, a left-handed pitcher, young kid, international prospect that the Orioles signed for $30,000. So again, a common thread with all these pitchers we're drafting, guys from small schools, international prospects who signed for low dollar amounts, not the $1 million prospects here. But De Leon, he's a lefty who throws 97, 98 miles per hour. He got in the game the other day. I believe that was the Pirates game. But he got in there. He sat 96, showed off the slider, changeup, and shout out to at TJ Stats, TJ Nesteco, great deep statistical dive follow there. Pulling up his player card, Luis De Leon, all three of his offerings graded out as 50 plus offerings in that small sample outing, but that's what De Leon does. He throws heat from the left side. He has a very impressive slider, and I think the floor there for him is a fastball slider reliever. We'll see if he can stick as a starter. Of course, walk's a bit of an issue there, but we'll see how big of a step forward he takes this season. And my next pitcher, two guys I really like here, and I'm going to go Trey Gibson here to round out my pitching staff. Undrafted free agent last year out of Liberty University. He didn't pitch his final year at Liberty because of a suspension. We don't know why. Went to the Cape Cod League. He had an ERA over 10 in the Cape Cod League and like 21, 22 walks in 15 or something innings. It was horrendous. Orioles signed him. Apparently they were in on him when he was in high school. It's proof that stuff matters. And now Gibson, he's 6'5", 240 is what he's listed at. I think he's a workhorse. Last year's out building him back up. He sits 95. He touches 99. He's got multiple secondaries that produce plus whiff rates. Huge extension, 7+ feet of extension there with Gibson. This is a guy who's, again, the helium is surrounding him this year. And I think you're going to hear a lot more about Trey Gibson as 2025 rolls through.
Definitely an interesting arm off the board. I am planning to take another arm next here in round 5, but first we're going to get to one more break here in just a moment. This episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is also brought to you by Wonderful Pistachios. You're looking for a snack that's both delicious and nutritious? Crack into a good source of protein with Wonderful Pistachios. Wonderful Pistachios is one of the highest protein nuts. Each 1 ounce serving has 6 grams of protein, giving you over 10% of your daily value. Plus, they're packed with fiber and better for you unsaturated fats to help you keeping fuller longer. Now, personally, I'm a fan of the classic in-shell variety, but people love the no-shells variety as well. They are a great snack, great protein, and great for on the go as well. So get snackin' and get crackin' with the snack that packs a protein punch. Visit wonderfulpistachios.com to learn more. All right, so we're back on our 2025 Orioles minor league draft. We got the guys from Orioles on the Verge here, Nick, Bob, and Zach. We are into round 5. I am up with my next selection. Looking at my team here, I've got 2 pitchers and 2 hitters on the roster, so I could go either way. I'm basically down to 2 arms who both had incredibly similar seasons in Double-A Bowie last year as starters. I think many prospect analysts would choose the other guy as the higher ceiling guy, but I just like the story of Alex Pham, so I'm going to go ahead and take him as my third pitcher here. It was 27 starts. It was 120 innings. I mean, 120 innings, in Double-A, it's pretty high workload at this point in the minor leagues for what guys are given by their teams and how much they're allowed to pitch. I mean, he's out there posting a 28% strikeout rate to a 10% walk rate in a starter's workload in Double-A. That's pretty impressive. And we know he's not the most daunting figure. He's maybe 5'11" is what he's listed. And it's not going to be the biggest, most giant power stuff you're going to see in the system. But it feels like a guy who's probably had the odds stacked against him his entire baseball career. And that's somebody I'm going to bet on getting to Norfolk, having success, and finding himself in Baltimore at some point. And then we've got Zach with the next pick.
Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and draft my third pitcher here. I'm going to take Edgar Portes, and this is a little bit of an off-the-wall pick, but this is a pitcher that I really like. Fastball velocity right now rides about 92, 93 most starts, but he showed that he could get up to 95 last year. And being a younger guy with room to fill out, I do think we could see the velocity tick up. As it is, it's a pitch that has really good late movement in the zone, and like a lot of pitchers that the Orioles target, he works really well with the fastball up in the zone. The big offering, though, is a slider. The slider I recently picked as the best secondary, the best breaking ball in the farm system. It's got very good movement, good stuff plus grades. The changeup is a pitch that has the most room to develop. And that's probably going to be what determines whether or not he sticks as a starter, is whether or not the changeup comes along or he's able to find a third pitch. Perhaps it's a cutter, maybe it's a sweeper, something to offset the fact that the changeup is not that effective for him. What Portes has done really well in the last few years is just continue to improve his command of all of his pitches. And for much of the first half last year, he and Moises Chase were teammates at Aberdeen. And Chase, I still believe the Orioles gave up too much in that deal for Soto. I think that's going to come back to haunt the Orioles. But I made the point a few times on our show that when I looked at the two prospects, there was no question in my mind Chase had the higher ceiling, but that Portes was the more refined pitcher to this point. So I still feel like Portes is a guy that could end up giving the Orioles a lot of value long term, whether that is as a mid to back end starter or as a reliever that gives you more than 3 outs in a game.
All right. Bob's got the back-to-back picks up next.
I have no choice but to go with hitters here, even though there are still some pitchers out there in this deep farm system. We might not have the top end that we used to have, but it is a very deep system. I will go with outfielder Austin O'Verne with my first pick, who I think is a sneaky upside pick out of USC. He's got all the tools that the rest of the outfielders that the Orioles have, the speed, the defense, a little bit of hit tool, some swing and miss to the game, but a lot of upside there. And I think he has a chance to be a breakout player this year. And for my sixth pick, I will go with the second youngest pitcher in all of the spring breakout games on Saturday. That would be Steven Martinez. I think he's 17 or he's very young. He's 17, just turned 17 not that long ago. Big right-handed power hitting outfielder who I think was originally supposed to sign with the Yankees. It's done well for the Orioles before when something like that has happened. Samuel Basallo. But Martinez, I think this is a guy that's so young and has performed well already, plus the tools, plus reports that we've heard. I think he has a chance to be the next Basallo-esque meteoric rise if everything goes right. But the Orioles have a lot of these types of guys, but I think Steven Martinez is number one on my list as for who could break out in a big way in the next year or two.
All right, we are back over to Zach.
In a similar vein, I'm going to take Jordan Sanchez with this pick. Signed out of Cuba last year or in 2023. He made his debut in the Dominican Summer League last year and posted a staggering 166 WRC plus. Now, Sanchez was a little bit older than his competition in the Dominican Summer League, but he checked off the boxes that we like to see hitters do at that level, which is good walk numbers, good strikeout numbers, and at least some extra base hit power. What puts Sanchez over the top, though, is that he was getting the ball over the fence a lot more than we see from players at that level. Now, 19 listed at 6'1", 176 pounds, so there is still room to fill out a little bit. Nonetheless, he seems like a guy that is athletic enough to be able to stick in the outfield. And there has been some buzz since the offseason that Sanchez may skip the FCL and go straight to Delmarva. And I do think that even if he doesn't start this year in Delmarva, with the FCL season starting earlier, that could allow him to get there before the end of the first half and spend most of the summer with the Shorebirds. And I think he's a guy that is going to adjust that level well because he has so many of the attributes you look for hitters that are going to transition to that level. Already hitting for power, walking a lot, not striking out a ton. This is someone who I think in the next year or two is going to take some real strides forward, and this year could be a real breakout for him.
I am thinking that I may just go Sanchez to Sanchez right here. And I think I'm going to take Emilio Sanchez with this pick. I do need to take a hitter. Now, this could be considered maybe a sleeper, but I mean, Eric Longenhagen did have him 21st in his Orioles list last year at Fangraphs, and he's already bumped up to 15th on that list in the updates. I know you guys have him 31st, it looked like, on your list this year as well. So maybe not the biggest sleeper if he's hanging there right around 30. I mean, It's mostly just dreaming on what he can do. He's a shortstop who's going to turn 18, actually about a month from today when this podcast is being posted, and it's not the biggest power at this point. He did not homer in 203 plate appearances in the Dominican Summer League last year, and he only hit 212, but it was a 112 WRC plus. He walked more than he struck out, which is always good. The Orioles signed him for more than $1 million. And he's just he's not the biggest guy right now, but as you talked about with Jordan Sanchez, like Emilio Sanchez is listed at 6'1", 170. He can certainly fill out at shortstop. And I thought, why not take somebody who's super projectable? Because I took two hitters in Bradfield and O'Farrell who are getting closer to the high minors, were these huge SEC, ACC prospects who are trying to get better at different things, but they've already been stars. Thought, why not take somebody that we can dream on, maybe another guy who could potentially get better and better and be another fruit of the labor here of this international system for the Orioles.
I like the pick. Last year's international class, I think, had a big year in the Dominican Summer League. So I know I'm pretty excited to see who among that group really breaks out here this year. And I'm going to stick with the international prospects. I need one more hitter to close out the first 6 rounds here. And I'm shocked he's still on the board knowing this group. I'm going Thomas Sosa. I thought for sure Bob was going to go Thomas Sosa and leave me Austin Overn, but I'm going to go Thomas Sosa here. Look, young guy. As you know, if you listen to our show, we had Anthony Villa on, Orioles Director of Player Development. I believe that's his correct title right now. Apologies if that's incorrect. But, he said Sosa thinks he's Ken Griffey Jr. Ken Griffey Jr. is my favorite player growing up. So I'm going to put Thomas Sosa on this team. He's he's 20 years old. He reached high A last year. Enormous raw power. We just haven't seen it in games yet. He's multiple max exit velo numbers are like 112, I believe, is what we've seen him put up. I don't know if he's got any higher. It's hard to go much higher than 112 as a 19-year-old kid, but he's regularly pumping 107 plus, 110 plus. I think he turns that into in-game power this year when he returns to Aberdeen. He's also a speed threat. Huge cannon for an arm out there in the outfield. He can steal 30 plus bags. We'll see if he can take that leap forward this year. Season's getting ready to start here in a couple of days. And for my, what do you call this, a deep sleeper pick, I have a pick that I would love to add to this team. It was not a sleeper, but I'm going to dig a little deep here, and I'm going to take a pitcher, and it's going to be another international pitcher just to highlight the international prospects coming up. And for my deep sleeper here, I'm going to go right-handed pitcher Esteban Mejia. I think MLB Pipeline at some point has had him as a top 30 guy. I don't know if he's still on their list or not, but he's 17 years old right now. He's tall. He's 6'3", a little lanky, listed at 175, but signed for about $150,000, $175,000, I believe, at the Dominican Republic in 2024. And this is a guy who's touched 100 miles per hour already. He's got multiple breaking balls, multiple secondary offerings. And the thing that I like with Mejia is we've seen this so many times. You guys can list off name after name of these young international arms who join the system. They can throw at 100 plus, but they have no clue where it's going. They're just throwers. They're not pitchers. Mejia is able to find the strike zone at a really solid rate already at a young age. So I think he could be this year's, Keeler Morphe if things go right, in that he's probably not going to skip a level, but I think this is a young international arm to keep a close eye on here in 2025.
All right, we are down to our final round. Nick just took his deep sleeper. Now I've got my deep sleeper pick up next. And just like Nick said, there's a player you'd want to take. I would love to be able to take Trace Bright right now. I'm not really sure he counts as a deep sleeper in the system, considering I believe at the time of the draft, he was one of, if not the highest pick Michael Elias had ever used on a pitcher. That's been succeeded since then. But I think a lot of people know Trace Bright. He had a good year in Double-A last year. I'm going to take a player who hasn't exactly lit it up yet. Mostly that's because he was a 2024 draft pick and he didn't play a whole lot after the draft last year, but more so a player I am just enamored with what he can do on the baseball field. I'm going to take Ryan Stafford as my deep sleeper pick, and here is why. Now, Stafford got drafted in the 5th round last year out of Cal Poly. He is a catcher, but he is also so much more than a catcher. This is a guy who played, and let me just make sure I have this right. He played in 20 games in the Orioles system last year, 15 in Delmarva, 5 in Aberdeen. In 20 games, he managed to make starts at catcher, first base, second base, left field, right field, and DH in the minor league system in just 20 games. That is incredibly interesting to me. Now, he was really good offensively in 15 games in Delmarva. He was not in 5 games in Aberdeen. That who really cares at the end of his draft year in 5 games. But I am just enamored with a guy that the Orioles took in the 5th round. Like, you see a guy playing that many positions in his first year, you're thinking like 18th round, 5th year senior who the Orioles took. Like, no. They spent some draft capital on this guy in the 5th round. And yeah, they only gave him about a $400,000 signing bonus. They saved a little bit of money probably where that pick was. But I don't know, if you're going to play that many positions right out of the gate and you're a catcher, it's not like he's a shortstop who also played second and third and left. He is a catcher playing that many positions. Does he have the Dalton Varsho gene in him where he can be a catcher and also a Gold Glove level defender at other positions? Maybe, but I am just so excited to see where else the Orioles are going to put him on the diamond this year.
That's a good pick there. And I was torn between 2 players for my sleeper pick, but I'm going to go with the 2 that I think qualifies more as a deep sleeper and take Ellis Cuevas. Cuevas really burst on the scene last year in the Florida Complex League by doing what he has done throughout his career, which is walking at a decent rate, not striking out very much, but the real turning point for him was he was showing a lot more power, 6 home runs on 123 WRC plus in 56 games in the Complex League. That earned him a promotion to Delmarva, where he was really solid down the stretch for the Shorebirds. 81 plate appearances across 20 games, posted a 127 WRC plus with a 17.3% walk rate. Cuevas is a very athletic player, really good speed that shows in his stolen base totals that he's posted to this point in his career. And from what we understand, the Orioles want to give him a look a lot in center field this coming season at Delmarva. And without having Vance Honeycutt there in the outfield and without an obvious candidate moving up from the FCL to take over center field, Cuevas should get his fair share of reps out there. Even if it doesn't work out for him in center field, there's a very interesting super utility profile here because he can play either outfield corner as well as any infield corner. So Cuevas already showing a lot of versatility on the field to go with plus speed, an interesting hit tool. And while I don't think he's ever going to grade out as more than, let's say a 40-50 power, maybe in his best years, he's a guy that could hit 8 to 10 homers or could give you a good WRC plus with good extra base hit totals off the bench. So Cuevas, I see kind of a very specific profile for him, which is a super utility type, but he's come a long way in the last year, and I think his stock is going to move up a lot this season.
All right, Bob, bring us home with the final pick of the draft.
Love Cuevas. Also, shout out to Aaron Estrada, Creed Willems, and Chase Alsop, who I think all could have been selected, but they are not deep sleepers, in my opinion. I will go with one of the 4 high schoolers that the Orioles drafted in the 2024 draft. And the one I'm going to pick is outfielder Nate George, who just got a shout out by Sam Dykstra on Blue Sky, and I'm sure the other site as well. But 70 grade speed, which should translate to center field defense. I think we've seen reports that he's got some power in the bat. Obviously, he didn't play professionally after being drafted, so it'll be exciting to watch him, quote unquote, in the FCL, and then who knows, maybe Delmarva later in the year. But just like to see these high school, high upside guys that signed late get in game action, see what they've got. And I think Nate George, while DJ Layton, I love the name, and it's a switch hitter. I like his profile a lot, but Nate George is the one that I think could have the highest ceiling of the bunch.
That's how you know it's a deep sleeper, because that was the first player of the draft and the final pick that I did not have on our draft board in the Google Sheet and had to write it in and then mark it off. So well done, Bob, to finish this off. That was the player where somebody, it may have been his agent, was like, this could be Mike Trout after the draft, correct? Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Love it. Listen, you know what? Do your PR, hype your guy up, got him drafted, get him in the system.
We got
see how it goes down.
Mike Trout and Ken Griffey Jr. selected in this draft here.
Yeah, I mean, what I think you can't have a better draft than that. So we'll throw it back to Bob to just because you just selected your final player, read out your 7 players that make up your team here.
Oh gosh, I didn't write it down, but I think I can do this.
We'll fact
Keeler Morphe, Cameron Weston, and Brandon Young as my pitchers. Love that pitching staff. My hitters, I believe, are Ethan Anderson, Austin Overn, and Steven Martinez, with Nate George as my sleeper.
Nailed it. Zach, your team?
Well, as Connor mentioned earlier, I took everyone's uncle's least favorite lineup by going with Vance Honeycutt and Judd Fabian as my first two hitters. Now, I didn't add on to that by picking in Yudis Mordan and the farm system's slowest home run trot to round out my offense. Instead, I went with Jordan Sanchez as my third hitter, and then my deep sleeper is Ellis Cuevas. And then I really like my pitching staff a lot, headlined by two hard throwers and Michael Ferret, and then a guy in Egor Portes is a fastball that doesn't have premium velocity but good movement, and he pairs as a very good slider.
And then Nick, your team?
Samuel Basallo at the top, Dylan Beavers, and Thomas Sosa were my hitters. I love this group. Good outfield and a lot of power among those guys. And then my pitching staff is Nestor Herman, Luis De Leon, and Trey Gibson. I mean, just a testament to the Orioles in their scouting department and being able to identify these guys, bring them into the organization, and build them up into the prospects that they are right now, and hopefully the top prospects that they are to become.
And then for my team, I took the high floors of Enrique Bradfield Jr. and Griff O'Farrell, and then the high ceiling of Emilio Sanchez as my hitters. And my pitchers are the all-star team of this week at spring training, which is Levi Wells and Zach Fruit. That was a bit of some bias from what I just watched, but I don't care. The stuff is incredible. And then went with Alex Pham to get a little more of more that they've shown us in minor league games. And then my sleepers, Ryan Stafford, because I think he might play every single position on the big league diamond at some point in the minor leagues in 2025. So that'll do it for the draft, guys. Thank you so much again for joining me to do it once again here in 2025. If you're listening or watching, let us know in the Locked On Orioles YouTube page comments who out of the four of us, me, Nick, Bob, or Zach, had the best team in this year's draft. And I guess we'll know by the end of the season. Also, I'm going to go and look back at our draft from last year and probably post it in the YouTube comments who did the best. Maybe I don't know what exact stats I'll use to compile that or who did the best, but I'll make some general judgments. But Zach, since this is generally your job at the end of each of your guys' episode, if you could throw out there where everybody. Now, I operate under the assumption that most people who are here are probably also over at Orioles on the Verge anyway, but in case they are not already, where can they find your guys' work? What can they look forward to as we creep closer and closer to opening day?
Yeah, so we're on a lot of social media channels: Facebook, Instagram, X, TikTok, YouTube, Blue Sky. We're also over at Substack, OriolesOnTheVerge.substack.com, and we've been putting out more written content. Nick has really been covering the draft lately on there. We're also going to have a lot of roster previews coming up there. And then as for what's coming up on the podcast, we're going to continue to have coverage of spring training, and then we're a couple weeks out from one of our favorite shows of the year, which is our preseason predictions. And then we're just going to keep rolling right there as we get into the minor leagues. And I should mention, too, our Patreon community, because if we get enough money in there, we're going to finance Bob's really bizarre idea to reboot Field of Dreams, which you might have heard if you listened to our most recent show. If you haven't heard that yet, go check us out wherever you get your podcasts and listen to that amazing vision for a Field of Dreams remake.
Yeah, your guys' most recent episode was good, but the only words I can remember from it are Bob saying that Shrek is a bad movie. We will not get into that right now, but I think that was the first thing ever said on Orioles on the Verge that offended me personally as I listened to it. But that could be a different podcast and a different conversation. Guys, thank you so much again. Yeah, thank you so much again. We'll let that be Bob's final words so he doesn't get into Shrek too much. This has been the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. I will be back tomorrow. We'll talk a lot of spring training notes from the week. We're going to talk more about Zach Fruit. We're going to talk more about Levi Wells. We're going to talk about some injury updates to Kittredge and Henderson and all that good stuff. Things were slightly better in Birdland this week, and we'll talk about it on tomorrow's episode. But until then, I'm Connor Newcomb. This has been the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Orioles. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It's late on a Wednesday night. That is your team every day.